Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for a DevSecCon UK chapter event. So we are the chapter part of the global DevSecCon community, which is an inclusive community that educates and enables developers in application security. Coming up today, we'll be joined by Chloé Messdaghi, and she is a founder and principal at Impactive Consulting, talking about burnout and PCSD, placing a team at risk. But before we dive in, I quickly wanted to introduce myself. So I'm Waleed Arshad, and I'm the community manager here at Sneak, and the human working behind the scenes as well, making sure that everything runs smoothly. We'd love your feedback as we go so we can improve our entire function itself. So you can find us on Twitter, you can search for us by typing DevSecCon into Google or something, but you can also find us on Discord. Discord's actually the best place to interact with our speakers and fellow community members as well. So if you haven't signed up, you can find the link on our website at devseccon.com. We've got a new website actually, so type in into Google DevSecCon and you'll find us. And by joining the DevSecCon UK channel within Discord as well, and we'll be able to facilitate your questions to Chloé during this session as well. And if you're listening to the session afterwards, please find the live recording and ask your questions there on Discord, and we'll find a way to get them answered too. So once the session's over, you'll be able to rewatch the session on the website, share it with friends and colleagues, and maybe both actually. So DevSecCon is brought to you by Sneak, and our aim is to create a vendor-neutral space to share knowledge and best practices related to software security. Right. Enough of the spiel. Let me bring the star of the show to the screen themselves. So welcome, Chloé. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me. And good morning from my end and good evening on your end.
Where are you joining us from?
San Francisco.
Amazing, amazing. How's the weather going over there?
It's actually cloudy, which I'm actually happy about. I love dreary weather. I hate opening the blinds and seeing sun. I'm sorry, I should not be saying this because it's probably the reverse for you and for everyone who's watching from the UK. I've been and I've lived there. But when you wake up during the pandemic and every time you open those curtains and it's just sunny, bright every single day, you start feeling like it's Groundhog Day. Like there's no changing of seasons here, except for that one day where we had a fire and like we opened our blinds and it was like as if we were on Mars because of all the fires.
Yeah, that was pretty gnarly. But at the same time, I mean, if you're complaining about having great weather, I'm not really sure how far my sympathy can extend.
That's understandable. Maybe we should switch places for a year and see, which one we prefer over time.
Honestly, if Sneak wants to send me to San Francisco to stay there for a while, I'm totally fine with that. That's absolutely fine by me. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on the show, and also for taking the time to do this as well. Like we are, we're a global community, and we also have like people joining in from everywhere, and we really want to try and embrace the diversity and cultures that we've got everywhere. So thank you for coming with us on this journey here. So what are you going to be talking to us about today?
So I thought we could talk about mental health. So basically, we're going to talk about burnout. We're going to talk about post-COVID stress disorder, which is PCSD. Also, a little bit about PTSD, so you can understand about PCSD. And then after I give a little spiel about that, then I'm more than happy to answer any questions that people have on this topic. It is a topic dear to my heart before the pandemic. And I hope that this talk helps those that are leaders and managers in their industry or in their company to do better practices. And if you are someone who's not in a manager position, don't worry. This talk is also geared to support you. So we'll talk about what are some signs of all these different mental health situations and why we need to keep an eye on it, especially when we work in security.
Absolutely. And I'm going to be listening to this very, very intently, and I don't want to try and take anything away. So it's great that you've also got your title, your tags and everything over here. So please do follow Chloé, and let me just leave it to you. I won't take any more time.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Like I shared, we're going to talk about burnout and post-COVID stress disorder and placing team at risk. I am the founder principal at Impactive Consulting. Basically, I help businesses enhance trust, mitigate risk, and become purpose-driven. So this is a topic that's dear to my heart because I don't know about you, but in InfoSec, we all get burned out at some point. So we're going to talk about burnout. But I just want to first share that this talk does discuss heavy subjects. So if it is triggering, feel free to take a break, walk away, or another way, if you start feeling like something's triggering, another way besides escaping the situation, depending how you are, is you can place your hand on your heart and take deep breaths in and out and make sure that the breath goes as deep as possible into your belly. So I just want to reinforce this, that sometimes we don't know what our triggers are, but sometimes these conversations can be triggering for some. But if ever you know someone or you yourself has ever had any suicidal thoughts, please do call the hotline. This is the US one. However, if you Google search for the UK, the number will be the first thing that's listed. So let's first dive into these things. When I talk about burnout, a lot of people don't know how burnout actually happens. But burnout happens when we basically put our work life before our personal life. That means that we may identify as our job and not as a person, or our identity is attached to our work. Now, the thing is that most of the time we've grown up into believe that our job is who we are, our title is who we are. And in some cultures around the world, people may even designate you as the president, even though that you are outside of your work. And the reality is that because we don't have this work and personal life separation, this leads us to taking on mental health problems, but especially burnout. And for those that don't know what burnout starts looking like, it's basically you feel completely exhausted. Like no matter how many hours of sleep you have, it's not enough. Your creativity starts reducing over time because you're so exhausted. It's hard to have a new idea. But you might also feel like this sense of emptiness, or you feel trapped is a very common one. But also you can go from happy to suddenly sad, happy to suddenly angry, being cynical at work, basically having this lack of, is there a future? When is the future going to change? And having a negative view about life. Now, the other thing is that poor performance is another thing because you're so exhausted, you're not able to respond to emails on time or respond to people's text messages on time. And by that, I mean, within the amount of time that you usually used to communicate. You want to use that as your judging because everyone has their own way of communication and etiquette. So, say, for example, if I send an email, I always respond to an email within 24 hours. And that might be how you are, but that might be later, when you're burned out, that might be 3 days instead. So the thing is, we don't have a common, basically etiquette standard of how to communicate in a response time. And because of that, that also can stress us out, put us in burnout if we don't check ourselves. And social media has not helped on that because that instant gratification. But the whole thing about this talk I want everyone to understand is that we've always separated psychology from biology, but the thing is that they work together. Have you ever been so stressed out of your mind that you cannot sleep? Or you suddenly start getting sick? Or you have GI intestinal problems when you're stressed? Yeah, the thing is that you can't separate the mind from the body. You're one whole thing. You're a whole package. And because of that, it can cause some physical health. So if you are burned out, you may feel overly exhausted, kind of like a battery and how it's drained all the way and you're only running on 10%. You may struggle to sleep. It might be you have nightmares, insomnia, just very hard to fall asleep. And also like you'll wake up throughout the night thinking of different things. You can suffer from anxiety and depression, and suicidal thoughts do increase as well. So one of the things that we don't really talk about too much is that burnout doesn't just stop there. Burnout can develop into depression and anxiety if it's left untreated. And by untreated, meaning if we don't deal with the situation. You'll also get sick more often. If you are burned out, your muscles will get very tight and sore, and that's not a good thing. Because what that means is that you're high on cortisol levels, and then cardiovascular problems can increase. And sometimes we see people having, heart problems later on. Now, the one thing to note is I want to quickly touch on one thing is that a lot of people are under the belief that burnout can be cured by taking like a vacation. That's not true at all. It only gives you, it's basically a band-aid for a problem because right when you come back, you're going to think of all the things you need to do. And a few weeks later, that burnout will come trickling back in. So burnout occurs when we haven't made some serious life changes. So that's something to keep in consideration. But majority of burnout, I want to be very transparent here, is from your work life. In studies, it shows that within 6 months of joining a new company or in a new role, you will probably get burned out. And it starts off with hope. You're so excited for this job, and then going to frustration, anger, apathy, and then burnout. And that happens in 6 months. Now, if you're in a managerial role, that can be 1 to 2 years because you have a sense of autonomy and you have more control of your life. And for those that don't know, so PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Usually we hear that this happens to people that came from the army or from a battle, and afterwards they have some complications with their mental health. And what that looks like is you avoid situations or people, you may have nightmares, you might have flashbacks. I want to reiterate that flashbacks are different from memories in a sense, because flashbacks may make you feel like as if time is unknown. So you may be feeling like you're in that moment, and you really can't process, the time period. And sometimes you kind of know that you're in a flashback or like you're re-experiencing a traumatic event, and that can happen anywhere. But usually it starts with a trigger. Something triggers it. So it could be a song, it could be a person, it could be a room, it could be a smell, it could be any of those things. But overall, with PTSD, there is changes in mood and easily frustrated. Now, the thing that is really important for all of us to understand is that burnout and PTSD look very, very similar. And in our industry, there are people that are burned out, but technically they have PTSD. So, burnout and PTSD, how it works is that you're still being exposed to the trauma or extreme stressor. So, that could be your boss, or it could be, once again, it could be being in the environment again where something happened to you. Being micromanaged can end up becoming one of those things as well. But you're basically responding with fear, hopelessness, and horror. You have sleep disturbances and nightmares like insomnia. You'll have depression or withdrawal. That could be anxiety as well. You have mood changes and also generalized irritability. One of the other things to talk about is not on here, but disassociation can also occur where you feel like you're not in your body. Like you could look at, for example, you could look at your arm and you're like, is that my arm? It doesn't feel like my arm. I don't know my arm. It's having that disconnect from your body. And this happens to people that have gone through something traumatic, and that could be a form of PTSD. But also burnout, you may also develop that because you feel this sense of emptiness, like as if something's missing. Now, the thing is that people with burnout and PTSD, they'll avoid activities that promote such recall triggering events, but also that they don't know when the trigger is going to happen, where it's going to set them off. Now, post-COVID stress disorder is very similar to PTSD in some ways, but the difference is that it is caused by COVID-19. The thing is that many of us don't want to acknowledge is that we literally are going through a life-changing event. The pandemic is a life-changing event, and when we have a life-changing event, we change as individuals, and this will impact our mental health. There's not a single person around the world who is not impacted by COVID-19. And so one of the things to think about with post-COVID stress disorder is this feeling of lack of hope, this helplessness. When is it going to end? When will I have control over my life? And this is the reason why we have anxiety and depression from COVID-19, because we don't feel a sense of autonomy. We can't predict anything anymore. And that has thrown us off our course. And this is one of the reasons why when we don't go and seek therapy, this can end up becoming one of those things that we start developing suicide idealization. And so we want to really make sure that if we're feeling this way, to question this way. Go with your feelings, go deep inside and wonder, why am I feeling this way? So when you're feeling an emotion, you want to find out why you're feeling that emotion. So if you're reaching for, another glass of wine, ask yourself, why am I reaching for another glass of wine? When I'm drinking more coffee than usual, ask myself, why am I drinking another cup of coffee? The thing is, we have to catch these little things, and sometimes people around us in the environment can, but most of the time it's going to rely on us to be able to figure out what's going on. So if you find yourself drinking more than usual, or and that could be caffeine as well, all right, because caffeine is a drug. But those are things you want to keep in touch with, making sure that you're not overdoing things. And then the whole thing about post-COVID stress disorder, this is not just impacting, your personal life, but there's people in your office that may have post-COVID stress disorder. And so you have to be understanding that if you see people changing of moods recently or in the past year or two of you knowing your colleagues, it could just because they're overwhelmed with stress. And when we're overwhelmed with stress and not dealing with it properly, or we can't change the situation, that's when we get burned out. And if we don't treat burnout, then we get depression or anxiety, or sometimes both. Or it can also be PTSD. So how did we get here exactly? Like, why are so many people in our industry dealing with mental health problems? And the reason is we're failing employees. And a lot of people always believe that reason that people are burnt out is because they have too much work, their work overload, and that's why they're burnt out. Not at all. What causes burnout, believe it or not, is poor leadership and like really, really bad organization carrying tactics. So that could look like, for example, if everyone on your executive board is thinking or plotting or thinking about their political needs over the well-being of your employees, then we're going to have a toxic work environment, because that does trickle down throughout the company. What we want to see is more companies where there's a board where people are willing to keep learning, that they don't know everything, but also that employees are at the forefront, because you cannot make profit if your employees are not happy. And if they're not having creativity bouts, then that means that you have some people that are burnt out. And so these are some of the things that we need to understand, is that burnout is occurring because of our workplace culture. Because there's a lot of companies out there that don't put employees first or second or third. And this starts impacting us, especially if they contact us at all hours, like we do get in security. Now, the thing about security is that we are expected to work around the clock 24/7, 365, all days around the year. So that means if it's Christmas Eve, I might get a phone call saying, hey, we have a breach or something's came up. I need you to come into the office. I have to go do that. So that's how security, the whole industry runs. It's very much about putting out fires versus preventative. And the thing is that attackers work all hours. And so because they do, we're always going to have to be on call 24/7 at the edge of our seat. So that means it's a 24-hour lifestyle. And as you remember, we get burnt out when we don't balance our personal life and our work life. How can we have a personal life if our employer expects us 24/7 to secure? You see the problem here? It's an industry problem, not just a company problem. But that's one of the reasons why we've been so burned out even before the pandemic. This has been a problem since the beginning. And one of the reasons, like I said, was because we're not preventative yet. We're always about, we need to put out the fire. And the reason for that is because we don't have enough time or employees on our security team. And sometimes what this means is that a lot of organizations don't have incident response plans. So 74% of organizations report having an ad hoc or no incident response plan at all. And those that do have plans are 52% have no review or testing schedule. So what does that mean exactly? Well, overall, if I'm going ad hoc or an incident and I don't have an incident response plan, that means that I'm going to take a longer time to remediate the problem. And that means that when a problem is about to happen, no one on the team knows what is this following schedule or what's the following things that need to happen. So now we have a communication problem. We're also assuming that people can handle the amount of stress that happens when a breach occurs. Because the reality is a breach will happen, we just don't know when. And so this is a big problem because that means in the middle of the night, you may be laying down and thinking, oh, what happens if this happens? And next thing you know, you're going into all these thoughts of, well, we don't have an instant response plan, so how's this going to work? And that is the reality, is that having that piece itself is stressful, is that they're not, up to date, or there isn't even one. And now the last thing, in case if you are wondering, what does a disclosure, like policies, what does that have anything to do with planning? Well, think about it this way. There are hackers around the world. And when I say hackers, I mean security researchers. They are all around the world wanting to help other companies remain safe. And so for them, they want to report a vulnerability if they catch it. And most of the Forbes 2000 list don't have vulnerability disclosure policies. That means if I find a bug, I don't know who to report to. That means I don't know whose email address. I don't know how to get a hold of someone. And also I have to worry about basically my own rights too, because I don't have any legislative protection, because there is no legislative protection out there for anyone who's a hacker. And so because of that, I might find a vulnerability and I want to report it, and I cannot do that because now I'm scared. And what ends up happening is because I was not able to report this vulnerability, or if I did, it was through a social media channel, you may have thrown it away, you just ignored it. And what ends up happening is an attacker finds that vulnerability and takes advantage of you. Now, when we work with hackers around the world to, make sure that we have vulnerability disclosure policies, that means we're not fully relying on our security team. And I know that sounds weird, but we want to, right? Yes, to a certain extent. However, usually what ends up happening is that the more diverse eyes that we have on things, they're more likely to find bugs that our team cannot find. And it's better for them to be able to find a way to report it to us so an attacker doesn't take advantage of the situation. And this is one of the things that we can help reduce the stress in our office and have better plans when we have vulnerability disclosure policies. Now, the other thing is that usually what companies have done in the past during these situations is that they'll throw tools. Yeah, they ignore the human element. They ignore that people are burned out and that this can become a security risk. Instead, they're like, let's just buy more tools without even talking to the security team what tools we need. So there's 45 different security tools on average for companies. And one of the things to note about is that a lot of times they're not being used, or if they are being used, they haven't been updated either. So usually incident response requires about the coordination of 19 tools. So remember, if we have more tools and we're not planning, that means that remediation time is going to be very slow, and also it's going to cost the company a lot more money, but also bad PR as well. I know that was a lot to handle, but for those that aren't on security teams, I just want you to understand how stressful it can be to be on a security team. So I want you to imagine that you're a captain on this ship here, all right? And the ship, you found out, is sinking. So you try to get all your staff into the room to talk about the incident response. And what ends up happening, though, is one thing you should know is that most of your staff are completely exhausted. They haven't slept for days because they've been taking care of the customers, but also because they're short on staff. So they're also doubling their shift. So now they haven't had any break time for themselves and hardly any sleep. And, they don't know how to react to knowing the fact that the ship is going down. They might be in fight versus flight right now. Now, you, the captain of the ship, your customers are trusting you, your staff is a little exhausted, you could say kind of like as if they have burnout. And suddenly at that time, you're like, well, thank God I have this handy dandy binder that has all the incident response plans for the ship. You pull out the binder, but you realize the binder is for an older ship with older tools in it. So now you have to go ad hoc while your ship is slowly sinking and your customers are expecting you to rescue them and to make sure that they're okay. That's the thing we have to understand. Security teams and being in security is very much like that. You never know when the ship is going to sink, but also if you don't have preventative plans, you're going to run into a situation. And knowing that as a security person, you're going to be stressed out because you're expected around the clock to be part of security and you don't have time to do incident response plans. So this leaves you with a wreckage situation. Not just that, but also your company is going to look terrible when it gets out there that there was a breach. And it took you this long to remediate the problem. So these are things we have to understand. The takeaway from this is that the behavior impacts the lives of your employees and causes terrible security practices. When we're not putting our employees in the forefront and understanding that profit is connected to your employees, then we are forgetting the major party that allows a business to work, to function, to grow, and prosper. So I want to talk about a couple steps that can help the situation. First is that leaders need to face the fact that they've created toxic environments. I mean, the reality is that we need to figure this out. We need to make sure that security, that ourselves are not expected 24/7 around the clock, and that there's extra staff that can pick up the hours that we are unable to do. So that means that someone from another country could take on the other hours to make sure things are safe. And that's the thing, we have to figure out how to do this in a way that is, everyone is being paid well and making sure people feel respected and they feel like they have a purpose there because the company is purposefully making sure that security is a big priority and that employees' welfare is too. We also need to make sure that when we are thinking about, micromanaging, that we're not doing that because micromanaging can lead to burnout and to PTSD, but also it could become an anxiety situation as well. So we have to check ourselves as leaders. What am I doing that's making the team worse? And what am I doing that's making the team better? And that might be having really, really brutally honest conversations with the employees. Step 2, accept the new. The reality is that we've all been working from home for the last 2 years, right? And companies have been doing very well. Okay, maybe not the restaurant business as much, but I mean, I'm talking about right now, security and tech, it has been doing quite well. If you saw that your company was prospering during the pandemic from you working from home, and then they let you know everyone is supposed to start reporting to the office going forward on a certain date. This is going to leave basically your employees being like, I don't understand why that is being enforced. And the reality, that's one of the reasons why people are leaving companies at this time and looking elsewhere because their company, they themselves are basically saying you need to come on site. And people are just like, I don't understand. Because the reality is that when we commute to the office, that takes away our time, our personal time to ourselves. But also at lunch, we have to go buy our own lunch, or sometimes we don't even get to have a lunch because we don't have enough time. And then afterwards, we have to commute once again back home. This means that we have maybe at most 4 hours of our personal life during the work week. And that's something we have to take into consideration, is that employees are at a point where they want a better work and personal life balance, realizing that our job is not who we are. And that's the thing we have to accept the new, is that employees want to be respected. They want their employer to understand they have a personal life. In other countries around the world right now, and actually in the UK, they're testing this 4-day week. Yeah, that's right. 4-day work week. So employees basically will be able to have only 4 days a week towards, and then have, 3 days for their personal life. And this is something that is great. It's a great way to get started in having conversations about, does a 4-day week make better sense than a 5-day week? So that's something they're looking into. It is a study happening in I think in London right now, and it's with over 30 companies are participating. But they're going to take those results and then bring that forward and see if that could be a possibility for the rest of the UK. So I'm jealous of you guys. Um, but there's other countries right now. So France and Portugal, they've made it illegal for an employer to contact them during off hours. So what does that look like? So say if you work from, 9 to 5, at 5 o'clock, your employer is not allowed to contact you, period, until 9. Now, if you're taking vacation, it's also illegal for them to contact you while you're on vacation. This is something that we may want to consider, is that when it comes to employees' time off, it should be their time off. If they're taking a vacation, don't contact them. They're on vacation. They're not going to come fly back in to go and help with the situation. So you have to have backup plans in case this does occur. And that's the thing we have to do, is accept the new. Why should people come back in the office if they don't want to come back in the office? Was there a survey that took place where employees get to decide what way that they prefer, where employees even, have a voice at the table when a discussion was that everyone has to come on site? So we have to understand that we have to accept the new. People want a work and personal life balance because they're starting to understand that our mental health is something of importance. But also that means that if you are doing on-site, why is that? If you are a leader yourself and you want them to come in the office, what is the reason for it? Is it because of micromanaging? Or is it because what you think is that whoever's the first one in the office and the last one to leave the office, they're a harder worker and should be promoted? If that's the case, then I hate to tell you this, but you also have the mindset of someone who's micromanaging. The reality is that we always have this thing like seeing is believing, right? So whoever's the first one in the office and that same person is the last one out, that person must be promoted because they've been working all hours. Let me tell you how that actually goes down. People go on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter throughout their workday. If they're there for the longest hours, it doesn't determine whether or not that they are good people that should be promoted. People should be promoted based on their ability to do their work. It doesn't matter how many hours. It matters about the quality of their work. They're hired for the quality of their work, not for their work hours. That's in tech and security. So that's one of the things. We have to accept the new, because if we keep pushing away from the new, then that means that we are setting ourselves up for a real bad situation. Taking some time off is one of those things that's really helpful for those that are feeling like they might be burned out. And what I mean by taking some time off, this is what is the perfect way how to take some time off. That means you never check your work stuff. You're taking the time off, you shouldn't be checking your work. That also means that taking a break from social media. I know for some that's a very scary idea, but the reality is that social media is not the greatest thing for your mental health either. And when we're taking time off, we're trying to basically recharge our batteries. And so that means taking time off from social media. That means taking time off from anything that's connected to your work. That means you get to do all the other things. Maybe like paint, maybe go for a hike. Maybe that means, learning how to play the guitar. You always wanted to learn. But the reality is you need to take some time off, but also take that time to really consider what's missing in your life and why aren't you happy? And I know that's a really scary thing to dive into, which is basically acknowledging that there is a problem and that you have to understand that. The thing that we don't talk about too much is that when we're overworking or when we're a workaholic, we're also escaping something internally. And so one of the things is that if you're constantly working to distract yourself, and you may not even know this, by the way, a lot of times people have no idea that they're escaping from trauma. It could be years later and they realize. But the thing you have to do is understand that you're safe and you have the ability to change your life to a certain extent. What I mean is, if you're burned out because your job, if you cause anxiety because of your job, it may be a good time to look elsewhere. Burnout usually gets healed when we make changes in our life. So that's something that takes some time off to really consider. So if you're taking time off, ask yourself, what's causing me to be this unhappy? Or what's causing me to feel this stress? Or what's making me feel like I don't have control of my own body or my mind? Take a moment there and really realize and reach deep inside what is going on here. And this may require therapy, and therapy should not be stigmatized at all. Therapy is something that I think every single person should go through, especially because of the pandemic. We had a life-changing event, and life-changing events impact us. So having a therapist is a great way to really understand more of you and any hidden trauma that you may have or any triggers that you may not know of, but really understand, why are you feeling this way? So I just want people to know, by taking some time off, it doesn't mean to enjoy a vacation. What it means is to ask yourself, what is going on and how can you do better for yourself? Step 4, companies can support mental health by providing resources. Now, I just really want to reiterate something first here, is that resources are second. The first is making sure that you're treating your employees well and you're allowing them to have a work and a personal life balance. So sometimes we see this with companies, is that they'll say like they care about the mental health of their employees, but they're asking for them all to come back on site and they're making it a requirement. And employees are upset and leaving. So they turn around and say, well, we support mental health. Here is some resources. We're going to do some yoga and some meditation. That's not going to heal the situation. The situation is a lot deeper than what's on the surface. And that's more like a Band-Aid. So providing resources is great. Having one day off per month for like a mental health day is a wonderful way to move forward, but also acknowledging internally what is going on with the company and how to do better to support employees. That is the number one thing you should be doing. Resources are second. And last step is to be kind and respect boundaries. One of the things that we need to learn is being able to have autonomy in our job. And that's a very hard thing to do, especially if you're not in a manager position. You're always going to feel a little bit unease and you will overcommit to be there for the company and do your job because you're concerned about losing your job. But the reality is that you should have a company where it will support you, a boss who's going to want to see you succeed beyond them. That's what we all want. And that also means if you're a manager, please don't contact your employees during work hours. It's really not healthy. They need to disconnect. And what that means is that if you yourself are an employee and someone keeps communicating on Slack after 5 p.m., your end of your workday, don't look at it. You don't have to look at those messages at all. So that means also holding yourself accountable for your own boundaries. It goes both ways. So I always do this. If I am a manager at a company, what I would do is, if it's something that is not grave important, but I want to make sure that it's out there, I will send an email, but I'll let the employees know that I don't want them to check their emails during off work hours, and that email is just to keep communication going. They don't need to respond until the work day. So that's one thing, you could do that. Another way is you could take down notes of what you need to bring up with one of the employees the next day. So then you walk away. So it's really important that we hold ourselves accountable for our own boundaries, but also respect other people's boundaries. And that means making sure that everyone feels like they have a work and personal life balance. Overall, from this whole talk, I hope you understand that we all do have the power to change our industry and make it better. And I'm always looking for a solution on how to really reduce the mental health issues and how we can start moving away from 24/7 security approach, because a lot of companies assume that if you're on a security team, you're expected to be on call 24/7, even if the day is off. I had this one story of this guy, his wife was giving birth and his boss knew it, but called him because there was a breach and told him he needs to come into the office. That's what I mean. We have to figure out how to do better on this front, because we can. We can literally change anything. It's just we have to put our minds together and we have to move forward. It can be a lot of words, but we need to also take some actions. And I just want to say thank you so much for existing. Feel free to reach out to me at Chloé Messdaghi on Twitter or on LinkedIn or Instagram, whatever is your favorite thing to do. I'm more than happy to answer any questions also at this time. And first of all, just a big thank you to DevSecCon for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Chloé. Honestly, I was listening to that and I was just, the number of times I was just going, yes. It just makes the thing that not frustrates me, the thing that always catches me is that this makes sense. How when you see it, when you read it, when you hear it, it just all makes sense. But we still find ourselves in this position where it can get out of hand and it can spiral and you just don't catch it. And it's phenomenal. Like, for example, when you said that burnout, like going on vacation is not a cure for burnout. It's not like you can take 2 weeks and go to the Bahamas and you're going to be fine. That's not how it works. But you think that it will.
Yep. Every time. Every time.
I mean, I feel like we're all a bit criminal for that, where we just sort of think that it's going to be a magic wand, like either going to a new role, stepping into a new organization, or, going on holiday. It's just that magic wand is going to fix everything, right?
Yeah.
No, it's really fascinating. And I think that, so something that I was thinking about is that if this is an industry problem, it sounds like it's an industry problem, like whichever industry you're in, it's got different shades. Like I know, for example, teachers who are feeling the exact same thing, like they're feeling that pinch of, hey, we're being overworked, but we're not actually going to be compensated or recognized as such. Like if this becomes or is an industry problem, how do you foresee, like, us folks here, the people on the front line and everything, how do you really think that we can help change it?
Yeah, I think when it comes to security teams, the first thing is making sure that we get a full security team. That means that having multiple seats that are not filled is going to cause more stress on everyone else, because everyone else has to take on the work of the missing folks. The other thing is that if you're a high achiever at your work, you're going to get a lot more demands from everyone for you to complete it, because you've already been seen as that overachiever. So when you start burning out, then everyone's like, oh, there's something wrong with you. And then next thing you know, you're getting attacked by people because you're not being able to do your work because you were doing everyone else's work in the first place. So it's one of those things that we have to really understand, that there are ways, there are solutions here. It could also be like, if you want around the clock security team, that means hire people outside of the time zones as well. Having a team over there. And I know that a lot of times we always don't want to spend so much money, but the reality is that security is a priority. If you don't have good security, you don't have a good product, and you don't have a good company, and you're going to have really upset customers, and no one's going to trust you ever again. So that's the reality, is like we have to invest in our people, and we have to invest in making sure that what we create is something that customers like. But we cannot have creativity if everyone's burned out in the company either.
Well, I mean, so that's absolutely spot on. Like you do wonder, like, the short-term game versus the long-term game. Like, what is it in terms of like resourcing in the right places? And I guess as someone in security, like sometimes the hardest part really is sort of admitting to yourself or your manager that you're burnt out. I mean, I'm sure that even your managers would struggle to admit that and everything. So how do you? I think one of the hardest parts is having that conversation. So do you have any tips on navigating that conversation?
Yeah. I've been a manager, and I can tell when my employees are starting to get burned out. And the reason I'm pointing that out is I want people to understand that your manager has the ability to notice if your performance has changed. And as a good boss, your job is to be a coach. It's not to manage people and tell them what to do. It's more of a coach situation. It's more of like, how can I help you get to where you need to go? How can I help you on this project? That's a good boss. A boss is someone who wants to see you go beyond them. And unfortunately, we do have a lot of times where our bosses may be concerned that we may replace them, or that, that they want you to provide for them because they themselves are dealing with some pressure from the top. And so that's the thing we have to understand, is that there are some people that should not be leaders. And I know this is a very controversial thing to state out loud. Just because you're a good performer in your task does not make you a good manager of people. And that's the thing that we have to come to terms, because a lot of times we always associate, if they're really good at their job, then we should promote them and then they oversee people. And that's not the way you should be hiring a manager. A manager should be someone who understands that their role is to make sure that their employees are well and to doing very well. I would say that. And the other thing is, like, you can really do tell if some people are getting burned out by, they used to take 10 minutes to respond to an email. Now it takes them like 2 days. That's like the golden thing. Like, that's when you know something's up here.
No, I completely agree. Like, I've noticed myself taking a lot longer to respond to messages, whether they're personal work or work messages, just because it's like, you think, okay, it's not on fire. I just don't really have that capacity. Like, it requires capacity to go, okay, let me really think about this. And to your point about, like, organizations are so criminal of going, hey, you're really good at what you're doing. You're obviously going to be great at managing people. That runs a huge risk. Like, for example, what if you, as someone in a team, are there, roller coastering on your KPIs, in the sense of roller coastering on like your burnout and stress, in terms of like, you peak in terms of stress when you are hitting your KPIs, and then you drop down and slump, and then you have a new set of KPIs to get. And because your manager may be that person who's just been promoted because they're good at what they do, and all they're going to see is that, hey, they're hitting their KPIs, they're obviously doing great, so they must be fine, right? Like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I highly recommend for managers to do is to have 15 minutes a week per an employee. This is the time where you talk about what to prioritize, what are the tasks on hand. And what that means is not dictating what should be the priority. It's a conversation. That means, like, I come to you with a Post-it note of all the things I need to do. Okay. And that means having a conversation saying, I think that this one I need to prioritize and get this one done first, and then work on this. And then your boss should be turning around and be like, okay, I understand that this one is a priority. But I also want to let you know that the top is thinking that this is more of a priority. So let's talk about this right now. Let's figure this out, and I can push back if I need to. But I want to understand a little bit more about why this is priority versus this is not as much of a priority. Also, deadlines. Also, how can I help you get to that project, that deadline that just got moved up? Let me know. That's the thing. It's like, when you're a manager, sometimes you become a therapist too. So it's not a therapist, obviously, like a counselor. So you're like a counselor, you're a coach, you're all the things. But your number one goal is making sure that, everyone's doing their tasks on time. And if not, then how can you make that happen?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And one last one here. So you must have seen this. You must have seen this already, in the sense that there are people who, you mentioned it as well, in the sense that sometimes you are you're trying to work, like, bury yourself in your work because you might be running away from something, or you may be trying to suppress something. And I'm criminal of having done that in the past as well. So I guess this is it's more of a flagging up question of, like, how can you differentiate between seeing yourself as like someone who's ambitious or who has a strong work ethic, from someone who is like driving themselves down that suppression side of things, and then that inevitably leading to burnout, and then you almost try even harder to dig yourself out of burnout because you're like, no, I can't afford to be burnt out because I'm such a good worker. Vicious spiral.
Yeah. I highly recommend anyone who's a workaholic to see a therapist. I know that might be a controversial thing to say, But to be honest, it's the reality. There's a reason why we're overworking ourselves. It's because we're trying to escape something that we may not be acknowledging. But it also could be a fear, but it could also be a separate situation. It could be basically that you just had a child, and next thing you know, it's like you have to really overdo everything because you're so worried of losing your job because you are the supporter, the financial supporter. That's another stressor. So it's not always like a traumatic event, but it could be a changing life event that now you need to put more time and energy into. So I think it's one of those things, like, just in general, if you do not know why you're overworking or overextending yourself, it might be a good time to just see a therapist. Even if you're someone who's purpose driven, it might be one of those things that you should see a therapist about, because there's a reason why. But once again, there are people that are driven by purpose, and that might be a little bit more different. But yeah, working through trauma is one of the main things when it comes to understanding, why are we a workaholic? Why am I so burned out? It's so necessary.
Yeah, it's that self-reflection. Like, I feel like the hardest part in all of it, or one of the hardest parts, is that self-reflection. And then after that, it's like having the constant confidence to have those conversations with the people that really matter and can make a difference, and hoping that they're willing to listen. And if not, maybe it is that time to reconsider where you are.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. This was an absolute joy. I mean, it's not. It's a tricky topic, and I don't want to sound like I'm super happy.
Here we are, just smiling, laughing, like, it's reality. It's living. It's called being a human. We're going to be this way. That's just how life is.
Exactly. No, absolutely. No, honestly, Chloe, thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure. And I'm going to be forwarding this on to various colleagues and managers, not in some kind of a hint way. More of a, this is really, you have to see this. But no, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure.
Thanks. And there we have it. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Chloe for joining us, and I hope you all who joined us had a great virtual session today as well. That's unfortunately all the time that we have, but like I said, if you're watching this retrospectively, which a lot of you do, please do head to Discord, to the DSC UK channel, and drop your questions in there and we'll get them to Chloe as well. But thank you all for listening. Our next session will be in a month's time at the end of April. We're currently cooking something up. But until then, please do remember to share the video with as many people as you can. This is such an important topic. And we really appreciate, I think, as an industry, to get more spotlight on it too. But hey, we've been DevSecCon, an inclusive community that educates and enables developers in application security. And I want to say thank you for joining us, and have a great day.